Question mark? Anyway, the Lizardmen. They've got dinosaurs, dinosaurs riding dinosaurs, dinosaurs with lasers, dinosaurs with catapults. Basically, all flavors and variety of dinosaurs and lizard people. So, strategically speaking, the Lizardmen are very, very different from the Skaven, which is what I've been doing so far. And so I want to talk about them a little while before I start this battle. The Lizardmen have tough basic infantry. We've talked about the Saurus Warriors before. Stats, not great, but they hit like trucks when they do hit. Backed up by a huge variety of dinosaurs, monsters. So I have taken... this is the first battle that I've really felt willing to cast, to record as the Lizardmen, just because my previous battles have all been against Skaven, and I do not have a handle on the Lizardman versus Skaven meta yet. For one thing, I've had a couple of Skaven players exploiting the summon bug, which is very, very hard for the Lizardmen to deal with because they have so many single unit monsters that are very susceptible to being swarmed down by those glitched clan rats and plague monks. And for another thing, I just haven't quite figured out how it is that I handle the big hordes of Skaven. So I'm still working on that. Against Dark Elves, though, I think I have a pretty reasonable idea. While Dark Elves are a strong faction, kind of, they're fairly predictable in a lot of ways. So, my army pick, I'm going to put us on slow motion so we can kind of start getting things done. In the front here, I've taken 2 Chameleon Skinks. Chameleon Skinks are to the Lizardmen what Gutter Runners are to the Skaven, except they're not quite as good. They're not as good in melee, they have slightly longer range, and their damage is comparable with their ranged attacks, but their armor is lower, their hit points are lower, and they have fewer models. They do have 40% missile resistance, so these guys can actually stand and trade for a little while with ranged units like the Dark Shards. Without taking too much damage on the exchange, at least not if they're firing at something vulnerable. Backing them up, I have 3 units of Saurus Warriors with shields to protect against those missiles. I have 1 unit of Temple Guard for anti-large duty. Temple Guard are a great unit, they're a little bit expensive, but they are the only shielded elite halberd. They have high weapon strength with a big bonus versus large, excellent for stopping basically anything that's big, even Doom Wheels. Temple Guard can do a decent job against Doom Wheels. I brought Lord Mazdamundi on Zlak, his Stegodon. Mazdamundi is an absolute powerhouse. He costs a ton on Zlak, but it gives him 140 armor, 7,500 hit points, a big attack with a bonus versus infantry, a small melee missile attack, and he has a whole bunch of spells and abilities, including the Ruination of Cities, which is a triple wind spell, Banishment, which is a vortex. Neither of these cost any magic, by the way. Shield of the Old Ones, Apotheosis, which is a heal that also inspires fear, Curse of the Midnight Wind, Net of Amontok, a fantastically useful spell, the Lizardman Heal, Greater Arcane Conduit, which increases his regeneration. I brought Roiling Skies on him as well, just for the heck of it. Up front, you can see my Chameleon Skinks are beginning to do a little bit of skirmishing against these Black Ark Corsairs. We'll get back to that in a minute. I also brought a Stegodon, not the ancient Stegodon, just the regular one, which has a giant ballista. It does quite a bit of missile damage, which is both armor-piercing and poisonous, and it's still quite respectable in melee with 120 armor, reasonable melee stats, and a bonus versus infantry of 15. So this Stegodon is a very good multi-purpose unit. It does cost 1,700. It's expensive, which is part of why my army is so small. I also brought the Bastillodon with the solar engine, which is basically a small Luminarch. It has this big laser shot that does about 400 damage and blinds people it hits, and it has all the regular Bastillodon infantry things. Over here, then, Chameleon Skink still skirmishing, getting some good damage done on those Black Ark Corsairs, and not taking a whole lot themselves because of that 40% missile resistance. I've brought 2 Skink Chiefs on Pterodons, and the reason for this is they're fast, they're flying, they're vulnerable, but they're hard to hit because they are flying, and they have a ranged attack. They have a really good ranged attack, actually. Let me pause real quick because they're moving. Their missile attack does 160 damage and has a reload time of 3.5 seconds. So they have 100 ammunition. They fire every 3 seconds. They fire almost 20 shots a minute. It's more than 15 shots a minute. It's like 17 shots a minute, something like that, which means they can put out huge damage with their ranged attack over time. So these two are never going to land. They're never going to engage in melee. Their sole purpose is to fly around. They have cold-blooded, so they can drop heals on people, and they can just shoot forever without ever being stopped, unless the enemy has brought flying units, and even then they can kite most flying units. So that's the entirety of my army. Makes a big difference going from Skaven to Lizardmen. The Skink Chiefs are cheap. The Saurus Warriors are not too terribly expensive, but Lord Mazdamundi over 3,000. The Stegodon 1,700, and the Bastiladon is 1,100. So those 3 units alone are more than half of, or about half of my army. The enemy, let's go in regular speed actually. The enemy has brought an interesting list. He's got a couple of Dread Spears for anti-large duty. He's brought 3 Black Arc Corsairs, which are a dedicated anti-infantry unit and not a high-end one. He's brought Malekith on a chariot. A Cold One chariot that gives him a big bonus versus infantry. He's brought another Cold One chariot, super heavily chevroned. 2 Witch Elves, which have the ability that can cause enemies to... that can basically taunt enemies and force them to fight. 2 Dark Shards for anti-large and armor work. And 1 unit of Hargoneth Executioners. So this is a very heavy anti-infantry list, which is, to my mind, a weird thing to take against Lizardmen, because Lizardmen are all about the monsters. The only real anti-armored monster units he has here are the Dark Shards. The Hargoneth Executioners are anti-infantry, Black Arc Corsairs are anti-infantry, even Witch Elves are really an anti-infantry unit. They're flimsy, and they have a bonus versus infantry of 8. They can taunt the monsters to get them stuck in combat, but there's nothing to kill the monsters once he has them stuck in combat, so I'm really not sure what he's trying to do with this list. It seems like a weird thing to take against Lizardmen. Over here, Mazdamundi has netted all these units that were chasing my Chameleon Skinks, and I am starting to move forward with Mazdamundi, the Bastiladon, all that good stuff. He's kind of clumping up here. I'm starting to target my artillery on Malekith, and I'm also bringing the Skink Chiefs over to shoot at him. He's dropping a spell on the Chameleon Skinks. I don't really care. Didn't do all that much damage. There goes the laser shooting at Malekith. He's taking quite a bit of damage, actually. The Chariot is pulling back, the Cold One Chariot. But the Death Hag is still coming up. I noticed that he's kind of blobbed up around here and drop a Ruination of Cities just to split him up as much as anything. It does almost no damage, but that's okay, because it's just on a cooldown. By doing that, I forced his army to break. So now my Saurus Warriors with shields have caught his Cold One Chariot and his Death Hag, and the Temple Guard are coming over to support while the Chameleon Skinks provide supporting fire. Malekith over here has chased off these Chameleon Skinks, but then he gets netted, and now the artillery is going to go to work on him. Mazdamundi, meanwhile, is going to charge in here. He drops a Blade Wind on me, but it actually goes into his own troops. Dropping Blade Winds in the middle of combat, not necessarily always going to go your way. The Temple Guard have ripped that Death Hag apart in a big hurry. It's gone. I did pretty much lose my Saurus Warriors, but that's okay. The Cold One Chariot and the Death Hag between them kind of took care of that. Malekith has taken a bunch of damage. He's piling up a huge number of units for a banishment on top of my Saurus Warriors, but Saurus Warriors are very tough. They're going to last a while, even against all this Dark Elf infantry. Over here, my Chameleon Skinks and Temple Guard. The Temple Guard are taking a lot of damage because they've turned their backs to the Dark Shards in order to fight this Chariot, but they're absorbing all of this ammunition. So, you know what? I can tolerate it. I can deal with it. Especially because I have a whole bunch of heals available because I'm Lizardmen. The enemy infantry is pretty much breaking at this point. I think we might have missed it. I dropped another... I drop another Ruination of Cities at some point here. I'm not sure if I already did it. No, I don't think I did. They just procced Murderous Prowess, but it's a little too late. Malekith is in serious trouble, being chased down by Mazdamundi. He's taken a ton of damage from the artillery and takes another big shot there. My Temple Guard's still alive, still fighting that Chariot, which has now rampaged. I've dropped the Curse of the Midnight Wind on the front line to keep them from doing any real damage. Mazdamundi has Soul Stealer on him, but it doesn't matter because Malekith has already routed. Meanwhile, now that Malekith has routed, Mazdamundi is actually going to go after the archers. These Skink Chiefs have just been sitting up here this whole time shooting at Malekith, doing a fantastic job. My infantry is now breaking, but it did its job. All it had to do was stay alive long enough. Another hit on Malekith. I'm going to net the Dark Shards to prevent them from escaping, while Mazdamundi charges into them. My infantry is basically destroyed, so now I'm going to drop another Ruination of Cities right in the middle here, since there's nothing I care about, and it does huge damage. This is the situation where Ruination of Cities is fantastic, and that damage is enough to rout the whole Dark Elf army. So, let's talk about how that went and what the key units were. On my side, Mazdamundi was definitely the powerhouse, as he should be, since he cost, I think, a quarter of my total funds. The Dark Elves really, really needed to be targeting him in a big way, and they didn't. They weren't. Their Dark Shards were distracted. I don't know why this is taking so long to load. There we go. Their Dark Shards were distracted firing at my vulnerable Temple Guard. This is... I don't know why this is so bugged, because this is a lot more help than some of these units actually had. Oh, my Temple Guard actually, I used, since my Skink Chiefs have Cold-Blooded, I dropped Cold-Blooded on the Temple Guard, which healed them up quite a bit. I used Cold-Blooded on a couple of different units during the battle, actually. But so, the Temple Guard, they distracted a lot of attention away from Mazdamundi. He should have been monomaniacally focused on Mazdamundi. That is how you beat a Mazdamundi-led Lizardman list, because Mazdamundi costs so much money and is so dangerous you have to get rid of him, especially when he's on Zlak. The Skink Chiefs, no kills, but they did their jobs. They let me drop more Cold-Bloodeds to keep my units in the fight, and they shot at Malekith, and they did a bunch of damage. The Laser Lizard, the Bastillodon with the Solar Engine, I like it. It does its job. It does its work, which is laying damage on important targets. I also liked the Stegodon. 51 kills, and that was from splash damage and melee, because most of its shots that it fired were at Malekith. I'm not sure. I'm still contemplating whether I like the Stegodon or the Ancient Stegodon more. The Stegodon has a long-range single shot. The Ancient Stegodon has like a shotgun, practically. It's fairly short range. It's shorter range than most archers, actually. And it does a huge amount of damage over a fairly wide area of impact. In that way, it's kind of like the Reaper Bolt Thrower, but much more damaging. The Saurus just do well. In any situation where they can get their hands on enemy infantry, they do pretty effectively. There's almost no infantry units they don't trade efficiently against, except for high-end anti-infantry like the Executioners. Those do a good job cleaning up Saurus warriors. But overall, I also liked the Chameleon Skinks. They didn't get a whole bunch of kills, but what they did do was distract and disrupt the enemy army. They laid damage down on the Black Ark Corsairs early on, and then one of these Skinks sucked Malekith entirely out of position, and the other one sucked the Death Hag after it, and in both cases I was then able to net, surround, and destroy those very, very key units, largely because they've been pulled away by the Chameleons, so those guys did their job, definitely. I'm definitely going to keep experimenting with the Lizardmen, because I have not really... I haven't quite got a handle on them yet. Like I said, I've played a few battles against Skaven. I've tried the Krokgar, Saurus Scar Veteran on a Carnosaur thing. I'm skeptical. I'm not entirely sure how well that really does work. They seem quite vulnerable in a lot of ways because they are such a focus of the army. But in any case, I'll keep playing here. Like I said, I'm a little bit confused about why you would take this army against Lizardmen. When you expect monsters, Black Ark Corsairs are not necessarily something I would want to bring. Harganeth Executioners, they're nice, but they're really anti-infantry. I would rather take Black Guard against the Lizardmen. Chariots? I wouldn't expect much use for chariots in an anti-Lizardman matchup, because the infantry, while tough, are not the main focus of a Lizardman army. The main focus is the monsters. Like I said, I had 3 units that were literally half of my army cost. And if Malekith had been on a dragon, I think he could have done much better. If this chariot had been a unit of Cold One Knights with the anti-large bonus, I think they could have done much better. But good game to Moss Defiler, my opponent. Hope to see you around on the ladder again sometime. Thank you all so much for watching. Keep tuned, and we'll be talking a lot more about Lizardmen over the next several days, probably a week or two. It might take me a little longer to get a handle on Lizardmen than it did on Skaven. The Skaven I pretty much picked up pretty quickly. The Lizardmen might take a little bit longer. I'm beginning to suspect they're a little bit of a weak faction, at least in some matchups. Against the Dark Elves, they did fine. Like I said, 4 or 5 battles against Skaven, and I really don't quite understand how to handle that matchup yet, but I'll keep working on it. So anyway, thank you all so much once again for watching, and I will see you in the next one.